Hey everyone, National Master Sean Lei here. My exams are finished and therefore I'm back with our daily educational chess content for you to become a better chess player, starting with a 5-part series starting with space about how to find a plan in the middle game coming straight up. Now, before you guys ask, the reason why I'm wearing the mask today is because I have a skin condition that's kind of affecting my mouth and making it kind of hard for me to talk, and it doesn't look good to look at, which is why I'm wearing this mask. It's not because I have coronavirus or anything, so life is good. Alright, so on to today's lesson. So, the first thing that I think is the most important thing that a lot of people don't think about when they play chess is the concept of what space is when it comes to their chess positions. Now, space in chess isn't really the thing, when you go outside, look at the night sky. It's not that, all right? We're not talking about that type of space. The space we're trying to talk about is the amount of squares that you control using your pawns. As one of the greatest chess players in the world once said, the great Philidor, he once said that pawns are the souls of chess. And one of the things he meant by this is that if you really think about it, especially in the early game, pawns are actually the strongest piece in the game. Now, why do I say that? Well, the reason is this. I want you to think about it this way. If a pawn were to attack a queen and the pawn is protected, who's the one who has to move? Is it the queen or is it the pawn? And if you answered the pawn, you would be wrong. The answer is the queen. The queen has to move. So if you think about it, the pawns have a lot of power because they're the most worthless piece, which sounds kind of contradictory, but it kind of makes sense. Because if the pawn is worth nothing, nobody wants to mess with them. And so, the pawns, where the pawns are, dictate how much space you have in a position. Let me give you this funny position to look at. Now, is this position possible in your real game? Yeah, technically, but is it likely? The answer is no, not likely at all. So when you look at this position over here, I want you to ask yourselves, who has more space in this position? If you told me white has more space, you would be correct. How do we know? Because if you look at this position over here, white's pawns are very much ahead over here, which means white controls all the squares behind these pawns. So anything behind this is white to control, as you can see. All of this is white's. Black, on the other hand, only has this bottom row. It's not looking too great for him, and I think it's pretty self-explanatory why. His pieces can't move. If you compare just the pieces over here, this rook can move 3, rook can move 0. Knight can move 3, this knight can move 0. This bishop can move so many different squares. They can move 5, this bishop can go 0. And so on and so forth. And so as you can see in this position, having more space allows white to have more active pieces and pieces that are much happier. Here's a little tactic for you to solve. In this position, it is white to move. What is the move here that you should play in order to force your opponent to essentially make a bad move or resign? In other words, zigzag. Now, if you were able to see the move rook h1, very good job. Rook h1 is a move that just instantly wins the game. Why? Because the opponent can't move any pieces now. The only move he could play was rook h8. We're blocking that now. Now, what move is he forced to make? He's forced to make a move that sacrifices a piece. Why? Because he has so little space. And that is game over. Now, of course you're thinking to yourself right now, well, of course, Sean, this position is of course better for white because he has just dominating all the sides of the board. Most chess games aren't like that. And you're right, most chess games are not. Which is why I'm going to be teaching you about something practical when it comes to space now. When it comes to space, usually one side has space on one side of the board, while the opponent has space on the other side of the board. Now before we get to that, I need to define a few terms. This side over here, these 3 files over here, I like to consider the king side. Even if the king's castle on the queen side, this is still the king side, because this is the side where the king begins. On the other side, this is the queen side. Why? Because the queen starts on this side. Now this middle part over here, this is called the center. Now, hopefully you guys understand this so far, because we're going to be using these terms a lot. Now, a lot of people ask me, why does white have an advantage? So it's such a big advantage going first. Well, the reason why is because usually white gets more space in the center, and then he gets to choose which other side he wants to have an advantage on, or have more space. Usually, you can choose both the queen side, you can choose king side, it doesn't really matter. But what matters is knowing what having more space on a certain side allows you to do in the middle game. And so let's say we play a very common opening over here. Let's say we play the French defense. In this position over here, you can automatically see that white has more space in the center, as you can see over here, but he also has more space on the king side because this pawn is very ahead and it's very forward and allows us to control this side of the board. On the other hand, look at black's next move. This is a crucial move. A lot of people I see at the very beginning levels, they play moves like knight c6, which basically just says to white, hey, you can have the entire advantage. I'm not going to play for any side of the board. You can win the game for free. Why is c5 so important? Because it indicates to white that he wants to attack on the queen side. Black said, okay, you basically drew the line. You want to attack the king side in the center. I'll be taking what's left over. I'll be attacking on the queen side over here. Now white obviously plays pawn c3 to defend his d4 pawn, and the play basically continues something like this. Well, usually the play happens like this. Possibly in this position c4 could be played. And in this position, because the battle lines are drawn, white's going to be attacking on the king side with moves like h4, h5. Maybe once his pawn is protected, maybe he'll play the bishop out here. Maybe somehow get his bishop out to attack the king side as well. White is going to be attacking on the side where he has more space, and black is going to do the same on the other side. This is why space is so important, and why understanding this one concept can help you gain a huge advantage going into your games. If you just attack on the side where you have more space, it's easier for you to move your pieces there because you have more squares your pieces can go to. On the other hand, if you try to attack where you have less space, I want you to imagine white's trying to attack on the queen side over here. You're just going to get destroyed. Why? Because black's pieces are much easier to come to this side than it is for your pieces to come here. Like, look at this. How are we going to attack this queen side? We can't play b3 because that gives up a free pawn. Are we just going to play knight d2 to play b3? We could, but this doesn't look too good at all because guess what? Your opponent, like at the very worst, he could play something like queen a6, you play b3, he could play b5. And now you just opened up more space for him to attack, and not only that, by moving pawns on the side where you have less space, all of a sudden you created more weaknesses. Look, a3 is a huge weakness for him to attack, and it's easy for him to get more pieces. Even this very silly maneuver will help you take advantage of these weaknesses on a3, as you guys can see, right? This may look like a silly maneuver, but at the weaker levels, this might actually work. And the reason why is because black just has more space, he's attacking a weakness, which we're going to be talking about next in our next video, weaknesses, which is another very important for you guys to understand to help you find a plan. Now, you might be asking, Sean, is space always good? I've heard some people say space can be a bad thing. And yes, that is true. Space can be bad when you have traded off pieces, which goes on to our final topic for today. When you have more space, especially on all sides of the board, one thing you don't want to do is trade off pieces. Because if you trade off pieces, that gives your opponent more space, more space for the rest of his pieces to be on. Let me show you an example now. Let me show you that silly example from before. When you look at this position over here, you might be thinking, yeah, white has more space here, but is he winning now? And the answer is no, because black has enough space for his one piece to be in. Well, even though white has this entire mansion for himself over here, this humongous space advantage over here, he can't use it properly and he can't squeeze his opponent out, which means black has enough space and white has too much space. Now let me show you an even bigger example. Let's say the king is over here and this king is over here. In this position, white is completely lost. Why? Because he's overextended and he has no pieces to protect his pawns. So black can just go around munching up all these pawns and it'll be over for white. However, at the lower levels, you don't really need to worry too much about this concept over here of having too much space, because having more space generally just gives you easier play to make, and as long as you know not to trade off pieces or not to trade off too many pieces, you'll be fine using your space advantage. Alright guys, so that's it for today for space. We're going to be doing a second part of space someday, but for next lesson, tomorrow, we're going to be talking about weaknesses and why weaknesses are so important in chess and how it can help propel your chess skills. Alright. So if you guys have any questions, make sure to tell me in the comment section below. Thank you so much for waiting out for these videos. The last few weeks have been hectic. My exams are over, so I'll be back to the daily upload from now on. Alright guys, see you.